The night everything began, I was seated at my parents' dining table, pretending to belong in a family that never really made space for me. The meal was simple: roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, and the conversation followed the same old script. Complaints about traffic, small talk about work, questions asked not to listen but to maintain the performance of closeness. My younger sister scrolled lazily through her phone, lifting her eyes only long enough to offer the barest acknowledgement of my presence. My mother's smile stretched across her face like an actor rehearsing lines. My father rose too slowly when I walked in, like he wasn't sure whether a nod or an embrace was expected. I chose the nod. The table was neatly arranged, a glass of cranberry juice waiting at my place. It used to be my favorite when I was younger, though I hadn't touched it in months. My mother pointed to it with a knowing grin. "You still like cranberry, right?" she asked. I nodded, unwilling to open the door to any real conversation. The ritual carried on. Eat, nod, laugh at the right places. Be the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't disturb the delicate balance of appearances. Then, as my father's rant about road construction droned on, my phone buzzed beneath the table. I checked it without thinking. "Get up and leave now. Don't say anything to them." There was no name, no emojis, no punctuation beyond the sharp finality of each sentence. It looked like someone desperate to remain calm. The room around me carried on as if nothing had changed. My mother nodding at my father, my sister chewing her food, the clink of forks against plates. But in my hands was a message that turned the ordinary into something sinister. I stared at the words, heart thudding, while the voices around me blurred into background noise. A dozen explanations rushed through my mind. Maybe it was a prank. A wrong number. But none of those explanations settled the unease in my stomach. Deep down I knew. Somehow I just knew. "I'll be right back," I said quietly, sliding my chair back. Bathroom. No one even looked up. My absence wasn't important enough to question. I climbed the stairs slowly, my phone still glowing in my hand. Upstairs, the bathroom door shut with a solid click, the lock sliding into place. Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, I read the message again, over and over, as though repetition might grant clarity. Instead, the words only grew heavier. Finally, I pressed call. The line rang once. A low, tense voice answered. "You're still there." "Who is this?" I whispered. "It's Marcus." Marcus. My sister's on-again, off-again boyfriend. His voice was taut, as though he were speaking from a place he shouldn't be. "What the hell is going on?" "You need to leave," he said urgently. "Just get up. Walk out. Don't drink anything." My stomach twisted. I looked at the untouched cranberry juice in my mind. "Why?" I demanded. He hesitated. Then, almost pleading, "Just trust me. Please. Don't touch the glass." My mouth went dry. I hadn't taken a sip, not yet. But the knowledge that there was something wrong with it clung to me like ice. "Why?" I pressed again. "What's going on, Marcus?" Pause. His voice lowered, almost cracking. "I can't say. Not over the phone. Just get out before it's too late." He ended the call. I sat there for what felt like forever, the cold from the bathroom tiles seeping through my clothes, my hand shaking slightly as I held the phone. There was no explanation, but there didn't need to be. Instinct told me enough. Something was wrong. When I finally stood, my reflection in the mirror startled me. My eyes looked wider than I remembered, my face pale, my lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Being the older sister never came with applause, only expectation. 3 years separated us, but in those years I had been forced into responsibility. Saving, sacrificing, always filling the gaps she left behind. That pattern had followed me into adulthood. Money, support, silence. And now Marcus was warning me about a glass of juice my mother had poured herself. The thought chilled me. I unlocked the door, smoothed my expression, and headed back downstairs. The performance had to continue, at least for now. I returned to the table, my family barely noticing. My father still lectured about city planning, my mother's smile never faltering, my sister's fingers tapping her phone. The cranberry juice sat there, glistening red in the light. I lifted the glass and swirled it slightly, pretending to drink, then set it back down. My mother's eyes flicked toward me. "Still your favorite?" she asked again. "Yeah," I said softly. But I didn't drink. Conversation ebbed and flowed. My sister told a story about a coworker stuck in revolving doors. I forced a chuckle, careful to play the role expected of me. The quiet one. The agreeable one. The one who didn't disturb the scene. Then casually I tilted the glass beneath the table. Just slightly. A slow trickle of juice darkened the carpet. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to appear that I'd been drinking. Minutes passed. My head tilted, my hand brushing my temple. Just a little dizzy, I murmured. My mother's eyes softened, full of feigned concern. You okay, darling? Yeah, I whispered. Maybe I should lie down for a bit. They didn't hesitate. They guided me to the couch, laid a blanket over me, touched my hand like caretakers. As if they hadn't just tried to poison me. I lay there with my eyes closed, every muscle tense, forcing my breathing into a slow, even rhythm. The living room sounds felt louder now. The creak of a chair, the clink of a fork, the faint buzz of the ceiling light. Then I heard it. Is she asleep? My mother whispered. Yeah, my sister replied. Okay, my father said. Let's do this quickly. The sound of my phone being lifted from the coffee table cut through me like a blade. Then fingers curled around my hand, lifting my thumb. My skin pressed against the sensor. A faint vibration confirmed the phone had unlocked. She has everything saved, my sister murmured. Check the accounts. Not all of it, my father said. Just enough to settle it. Kept my breath steady, my body limp. It'll look like she did it herself, my mother added. She always blacks out after a drink. The words landed like stones. My family, my own blood, working together with such calm precision to steal from me. And I, lying there in the warmth of the blanket, was wide awake. The silence after their betrayal was the worst part. I lay there, motionless under the blanket as my father muttered banking details and my sister whispered confirmation codes. Every tap of the screen sent a shiver through me, but I forced my body to remain slack, breathing steady like a sleeper. It felt like floating on the edge of consciousness, aware of everything but trapped in stillness. Then my sister's voice cut through. It's asking for two-step verification. She changed it, she added, irritation dripping from her tone. Try another app, my mother urged. More tapping. Another pause. Same thing. Everything's locked, my sister said, frustration leaking through her calm. A heavy sigh escaped my father. Just put the phone back. And just like that, the scheme unraveled. Not from conscience, not from hesitation, but from technical barriers they couldn't crack. I waited, giving them time to retreat to their seats, to pretend nothing had happened. Then slowly I opened my eyes, blinked hard like someone waking from a faint nap. Sorry, I murmured. Don't know what that was. I must have drifted. 3 faces stared back, unreadable masks. Concern painted over calculation. You sure you're okay? My father asked, his voice almost too careful. Yeah, I said, sitting up with a weak smile. I think I just need some fresh air. I picked up my phone, holding it casually like it hadn't just been weaponized against me. Their eyes followed, but no one protested when I stood. The trust had shattered, though none of us said a word. The air outside the house felt different. Lighter, sharper, like I had been holding my breath for hours and only now could exhale. Still, I hugged each of them before I left, the way habit demanded. My mother's perfume clung to my sweater. My father's arm was warm against my shoulder. My sister's hand brushed mine. For years, these gestures had been comfort. That night they felt poisoned. I almost cried. Almost. But instead I smiled, thanked them for dinner and walked out. What they didn't know was that I hadn't left myself vulnerable. I'd prepared in ways they couldn't imagine. Working in tech had its uses and paranoia had taught me to be thorough. I left the fingerprint unlock active, yes, but I had fortified my banking apps with additional security, layers they couldn't bypass with just my thumb. 2-factor authentication that couldn't be faked, logs that would expose every attempt. And more importantly, I had activated a recording. No flashing red light, no blinking dots, nothing obvious. Just a quiet background capture of everything they'd said while I was asleep. Every whispered plan, every attempt, every betrayal. Their voices preserved, their conspiracy immortalized. Driving away, I didn't speed. I didn't shake. I drove steadily, calmly, as though I were headed to the grocery store. But my destination was the police station. For the first time in years, I wasn't playing the family's role of fixer, provider, or silent bystander. I was choosing myself. That night I realized the truth. Family could be the sharpest blade of all. The police station was quiet when I arrived. A man in line was arguing about a parking ticket while I stood behind him, phone clenched in my hand. When it was my turn, I stepped forward and said the words that felt impossible yet undeniable. I need to report a crime. The officer behind the glass asked what kind. They drugged me, I said evenly. And they tried to steal from me. I have proof. Her eyes widened. She asked if I knew who was responsible. Yes, I said without hesitation. My parents. And my sister. They ushered me into a small room, offered a chair. An officer sat across from me, calm and steady, asking me to explain. I played the recording. He listened without interruption, only the occasional nod as their voices filled the space. My mother's false concern, my father's numbers, my sister's cold coordination. When the recording ended, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. Do you realize what they were trying to do? Yes, I replied. They wanted my money. He nodded again, typing carefully into an old computer system, jotting notes on a pad. This is serious, he said finally. For the first time I felt the weight shift. The burden wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the truth. 2 days later, my phone lit up with messages I didn't want to see. 3 texts and a voicemail before noon. The first was from my mother. Did you actually report us? What's wrong with you? Then my sister's voicemail, her voice tight, trembling, almost breaking. It was just a mistake. You didn't have to make it worse. Finally, a call from my father. I let it go to voicemail too. His voice was stern, filled with disbelief. You think the cops will fix this? You're going to destroy everything. You don't betray your own blood. I stared at the phone, the bile of betrayal rising again. Then I typed a single message back. You drugged me. You tried to rob me. That's not family. That's a felony. And then I blocked them. All of them. Dead. My sister. Group chats, emergency bypasses, every thread. Gone. I changed my number, froze my credit, rewrote my will. It should have hurt more cutting them off so completely. Instead, it felt like breathing for the first time. The investigation moved quickly. The recording was airtight, the bank logs aligned perfectly with the timestamps. Attempted fraud, biometric misuse, conspiracy, administering a substance without consent. It was all there. The prosecutor didn't need my words. The evidence spoke louder. They were charged, sentenced to probation, fines, community service, and barred from contacting me. No prison time, but the stain of what they had done lingered. I didn't reach out. I didn't ask how they managed afterward. But word finds its way. Through a distant cousin, I learned they sold the family home, weighed down by debt, legal fees, and whispers. Silence followed. No one in the family dared comment. My sister, once so sure of her path in finance, was spotted stacking shelves at a grocery store. She didn't look at me when I saw her by chance one afternoon. Or maybe she did and chose to pretend otherwise. Her boyfriend, Marcus, left quietly, vanishing weeks after the truth surfaced. Me. For the first time in my life, I lived without their demands. No more guilt served as obligation. No more just this once. My fridge held only what I bought for myself, my paycheck was mine alone, and silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like peace. Family had always been my greatest tether. Letting go, I realized, was my greatest freedom. The silence that followed was louder than their voices had ever been. Blocking them didn't feel like revenge, it felt like survival. But silence has a way of echoing, of pressing in from all sides until it feels almost unbearable. I expected to feel lonely without their constant intrusions, their steady demands, their guilt-laced requests. Instead, what I felt was empty. Not the kind of emptiness that makes you ache, but the kind that clears a space inside you. For the first time, there was no buzzing phone asking for money, no knock on my door, no carefully crafted, "we're just checking in," that was really a plea for help disguised as care. I had always assumed that walking away from family would be like cutting off oxygen. Instead, it was like stepping out of a burning building. My lungs opened, my thoughts cleared, my body finally exhaled. But freedom has its own weight. At night, when the apartment went quiet, I replayed their whispers in my head. She always blacks out after a drink. Just enough to settle it. She'll never know. Their voices weren't echoes of the past anymore. They were proof of what had been done to me. Proof I could never unhear. I'd scroll through my contacts sometimes out of habit, where their names had once been, Mom, dad, sister, there was only blank space. Erased. And yet, erasure didn't stop the memories from bleeding through. My mother's hand brushing crumbs from the table, my father's voice rumbling through walls, my sister's laugh when she thought no one was listening. Familiar, intimate, and forever poisoned. Freedom was mine, yes. But the cost was knowing the only family I'd ever had chosen greed over blood. A week after the police report, I received an official letter in the mail. Cream-colored envelope, black seal, no warmth in its delivery. The charges were laid out in neat lines of legal text. Attempted fraud. Conspiracy. Biometric misuse. Administering a substance without consent. Words that sounded sterile and cold, but beneath them lived the truth of what they had done. The detective called me later that day. His voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the weight behind it. We've handled cases like this before, he said, but rarely do we see evidence this clear. You did the right thing by recording it. I wanted to ask him if the right thing was supposed to feel this heavy. Instead, I thanked him, hung up, and sat staring at my own hands. They didn't feel like my hands anymore. They were the same hands my father had guided on my first bike ride, the same hands my mother had held crossing streets, the same hands my sister had clung to when she was afraid of thunderstorms. And yet, those very people had taken my thumb, pressed it to a screen, and tried to strip away everything I had built. Trust doesn't break like glass. It corrodes slowly over time until one day you realize there's nothing left holding it together. That night at the table hadn't been a sudden betrayal. It had been the final act in a play they'd been rehearsing my entire life. Me. I was both the audience and the victim, watching it unfold with eyes wide open. Days bled into each other, but my nights remained restless. Sleep came in fits, interrupted by flashes of memory. The glass of cranberry juice glowing red, Marcus's tense voice on the phone, my mother's whisper, "Is she asleep?" I'd wake drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in lazy circles, wondering how many years I had missed the signs. How many dinners had been rehearsals for that night? How many conversations about money had been less about support and more about calculation? Work became my refuge. Lines of code, endless debugging, late nights in front of glowing screens. It all blurred together, but it kept me from thinking too much. My coworkers asked about my family sometimes. I deflected with a smile, a vague "we're not very close." No one pressed, and I was grateful. One evening, while reviewing my finances, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, my paycheck felt like mine. No mental deductions for just this once favors, no hidden dread of another request. Every dollar belonged to me. That realization hit harder than any betrayal. Because buried beneath the pain was a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. Part of me had clung to their demands because it made me feel needed. Now without them I was free. But freedom is a lonely companion. So I held on to it. Because loneliness could be survived. Betrayal couldn't. Word trickled back to me through distant relatives. My parents had sold the house. Legal fees and debts had swallowed whatever security they'd once had. No one in the family spoke openly about it, but the silence carried judgment. The whispers would come later, I knew. They always did. And then there was my sister. I saw her once by accident at a grocery store across town. She wore a red vest, stacking paper towels in neat rows. Her hair was pulled back, her face tired, her movements automatic. She didn't look up. Or maybe she did and chose to pretend I wasn't there. I stood frozen in the aisle, pasta box in hand, watching the girl I had once spent my childhood protecting reduced to a stranger arranging shelves. For a moment I wanted to speak. To ask if she was okay, if she hated me, if she remembered what she'd said while I lay on the couch pretending to sleep. But the words stuck in my throat. I turned, paid for my groceries, and walked out. I didn't cry. Not then. Not until later, when the memory replayed in my head. Her whisper, "We're in. Some things can't be unsaid." Marcus disappeared soon after everything came to light. No confrontation, no bitter ending. He just packed up and left, vanishing like smoke. I heard about it through a mutual acquaintance. Someone who still tracked the family's movements from a safe distance. "Guess he couldn't stick around after that mess," the acquaintance said with a shrug, as though betrayal was casual conversation. But I understood. Marcus had been the only one to warn me, the only one who tried to save me from what was waiting at that table. Maybe leaving was his own kind of survival. Alone in my apartment, I thought about him sometimes. About how different things might have been if he'd never texted. Would I have drunk from the glass? Would I have passed out, my family's whispers turning into irreversible theft? Would I have woken to an empty account and a family insisting it must have been my own mistake? That thought haunted me more than the betrayal itself, because it reminded me how close I'd come to losing everything. Not just money but my sense of self. Now when I opened my fridge, every carton of milk, every container of leftovers felt like mine. When I lay in bed, my silence was my own. And when I locked my phone at night, I knew no one else could take it from me. Freedom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. It was the sound of finally being safe in your own skin. Freedom came with its own kind of paranoia. Even after the court dates ended, after the no-contact order was official, I kept checking over my shoulder. Walking home from the train station, I caught myself glancing at passing cars, wondering if one of them would slow down, if I'd see my mother's familiar silhouette, or my father's eyes staring at me through the glass. Every phone buzz made me flinch. Even though I'd blocked their numbers, changed my SIM card and frozen my credit, part of me kept expecting them to find another way through. They always had before, slipping past boundaries, weaving guilt into chains I never noticed tightening. But this time I wasn't the same person. I kept copies of the recording on multiple drives. I backed up my financial information, changed passwords every week, set alerts on every account. I lived like a soldier, guarded against an invisible war I hoped would never come. And yet, in the middle of the night, lying awake in silence, I realized the most dangerous battlefield wasn't out there. It was in me. I missed them. Not the betrayal. Not the lies. But the idea of them. The family dinners even when they felt empty. The soft pat on the shoulder from my father. The practiced warmth in my mother's smile. The nights when my sister crept into my room after a nightmare, curling against me like I was her shield. Those memories clung to me like ghosts. Losing them was survival. But survival isn't the same as healing. And I didn't know yet if I'd ever heal. The whispers from extended family started slowly. A cousin texted me, "I heard what happened. You reported them." A coworker pulled me aside. "Someone mentioned your parents had legal trouble. Are you okay?" Everyone wanted the story but no one wanted the truth. Because the truth was uglier than they could handle. Family wasn't supposed to collapse like this. Parents weren't supposed to drug their children. Sisters weren't supposed to scheme in whispers. I stopped explaining. I stopped justifying. Whenever someone asked, I just smiled faintly and said, "We're not close anymore." Behind closed doors, though, I replayed the audio recording like a masochist. Their voices, flat and coordinated, saying things that should never be spoken. "She'll never know. Just enough to settle it. We're in." The calmness of it chilled me more than any outburst could. They hadn't stumbled into betrayal. They had planned it step by step like a task on a grocery list. At night, I sat by my window staring at the city lights flickering in the distance, wondering what it must feel like to have a family that protected instead of prayed. To have a mother who worried for you without an agenda. A father whose pride wasn't conditional. A sister who didn't measure love in dollars. I would never know. That realization was a wound that would not close. One afternoon months later, I ran into an old neighbor. She was cheerful, oblivious, carrying a bag of fresh fruit from the farmer's market. He asked how my parents were doing. For a moment I couldn't breathe. How do you tell someone that your family tried to poison you? That the people who raised you plotted to drain you dry? "They're fine," I lied, forcing a smile. The words burned, but it was easier than truth. Because truth would open doors I wanted to keep locked. Walking away, the weight of that lie pressed down on me. It wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about preserving the illusion for others. People needed to believe in the sanctity of family, even when mine had shattered. If I told the truth, I wouldn't just lose my family. I'd become a symbol of what could go wrong. And no one wants to look at that. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring into my own reflection. "You're not crazy," I whispered aloud. "You're not wrong. They did this." Saying it out loud steadied me. Because sometimes the silence of disbelief can make you question your own memories. And yet, deep inside, a voice whispered, maybe if I had given them what they wanted, none of this would have happened. That was the cruelest scar of all. How betrayal makes you wonder if you're the problem. Time didn't erase it. The trial ended, the fines were paid, the community service completed. But betrayal doesn't expire. It lingers in the quiet corners of your mind, waiting for the right moment to remind you that safety is fragile. I built walls around myself. Emotional walls, financial walls, digital walls. No one got close. Friends invited me to gatherings, coworkers suggested happy hours, neighbors waved. I smiled politely but kept my distance. Trust had become a language I no longer spoke. Some nights I scrolled through old photos. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, family vacations. Smiling faces that felt like strangers now. In every picture I searched for signs. My father's calculating gaze, my mother's forced warmth, my sister's sly smirk. I convinced myself I could see the betrayal forming years before it happened. Other nights, I deleted the photos altogether, unwilling to carry the weight of ghosts. But the strangest part wasn't the anger or grief. It was the calm. The quiet peace of knowing I would never again hand them my power, my money, my trust. The absence of their voices became a strange kind of sanctuary. And still, in the middle of that sanctuary, I would wake sometimes with the phantom taste of cranberry juice on my tongue. The day I finally accepted they were gone was unremarkable. No dramatic breakdown, no sudden epiphany. Just a Saturday morning in my apartment, sunlight spilling across the floor, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I opened the fridge, took out a carton of milk and realized something simple but profound. Every single thing inside belonged to me. Every purchase was mine, untouched by guilt, unclaimed by anyone else's demands. It was such a small thing. A carton of milk. A shelf of groceries. But it broke something open inside me. For years, my life had been measured by what I gave away. My savings, my energy, my patience. And now, for the first time, it was measured by what I kept. That afternoon I sat at my desk and began writing. Not for them, not for the police, not for anyone else. But for me. I wrote down everything. The dinner. The messages. The lies. The betrayal. Every word they'd spoken while I lay pretending to sleep. Every thought that had haunted me since. By the time I finished, hours had passed. My hand ached, my chest felt hollow, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't erasing the past, but I was reclaiming it. Because betrayal had written its story on me. But now I was writing my own. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, bold type on a plain envelope that looked like any other bill. Inside was a neatly worded notice from a legal office representing my parents. Not contact, technically that would violate the order, but an official request regarding clarification around restitution and the victim impact statement. Tucked behind it was a printed note and signed, though I knew the cadence of the words. We didn't mean for it to go that far. We were desperate. Family fixes things quietly. I read it twice, then a third time. No apologies, just a reframing. What happened wasn't betrayal. It was desperation. What they wanted wasn't forgiveness. It was silence. A familiar script. The same logic that used to turn my savings into help, my boundaries into selfishness, my discomfort into overreacting. I sat at my kitchen table, the afternoon light lying across the floor in clean rectangles, and thought about the word family. When people say it, they mean safety. Belonging. A room where you can set your bag down and unclench your shoulders. For me, it had meant a ledger. Debts that were never mine to carry. Duties dressed as love. I could have responded through the attorney, told them the impact statement would stand as written, that the court already had everything it needed. Instead, I slid the letter back into its envelope and placed it in a folder labeled Records. The same folder that held the audio file on a flash drive, the case number, the order, the copies of my credit freeze. Evidence of a life I had decided to keep. That night I made soup for one. I turned on the radio not for company, but to fill the spaces that used to be their voices. I ate slowly, tasting every spice. When I finished, I washed the bowl and let it air dry. There was no one to clean up after, no one to perform for. Just a quiet kitchen and a woman who finally believed herself. Sometimes survival is a sentence of 3 words. No response necessary. I started building new rituals. Mornings became a practice in proof. A jog around the block at dawn, a shower so hot my skin turned pink, a simple breakfast I ate at the table instead of over the sink. I watered the basil on the windowsill, watched its leaves unfurl toward the glass. It felt foolish to be proud of a plant, but pride is a muscle. You rebuild it with small lifts. At work, I said yes to one invitation. Jay from QA was hosting a potluck. Bring anything, they said, even store-bought. The old me would have found a reason to decline. Too busy, too tired, trains are unreliable at night. The new me wrote I'll come and press send before I could retreat. I made roasted potatoes and carried them across town in a foil-covered pan like a fragile offering. When I arrived, the apartment was warm and loud, soft music, clinking plates, little groups forming and dissolving around stories. For a moment, panic spiked. A room of people and no script. I stood by the window, counting breaths. Jay found me. You made it, they said like the simplest miracle. We talked about nothing urgent. A bug that refused to replicate, a TV show that kept killing the wrong characters, the best bakery within walking distance. Someone asked about my family. The word tightened my throat. We're not close, I said, letting it land. No one pried. The conversation flowed elsewhere as if I hadn't just disclosed a quiet earthquake. Later, someone handed me a paper cup of sparkling water and asked for the potato recipe. I laughed, an ordinary sound that felt like a new language. On the way home, the city felt softer. I realized I had been waiting for permission to rejoin the world, as if safety were something someone else had to grant. But safety wasn't a door I needed them to open. It was a frame I could build with my own hands, nail by nail, ritual by ritual. That night, I slept without dreaming. It wasn't happiness yet, but it was rest. A month later, the detective called. He had a steady voice that never rushed. Just an update, he said. Their probation terms are being monitored. There's also a notation for victim restitution, and used because there were no funds transferred. Still, you're entitled to reimbursement for costs tied to security and identity protection. Keep your receipts. The practical clarity of it grounded me. I'd kept everything. The identity monitoring fees, the new phone, the locks I'd had rekeyed out of an abundance of caution. I have records, I told him. He hesitated. There's one more thing. Marcus submitted a statement. My hand tightened on the phone. What did he say? That he overheard enough to be concerned. He tried to stop it the only way he thought would work, by warning you directly. He wasn't certain what substance, only that something was planned. His statement aligned with the timeline. Pause. He asked that I pass along that he's sorry, for everything he saw and didn't stop. I stared at the sunlit streaks across my floor. Marcus had vanished without goodbye, but the apology threaded its way through the distance anyway. A clean line between what he could carry and what he couldn't. After the call, I opened my laptop and cataloged the receipts like the detective advised. I renamed a folder safeguards and dropped each file in bank alerts, password changes, authentication keys, backup codes in a sealed envelope. The meticulousness calmed me. For years I'd been the family's emergency plan. Now I was my own. Before shutting the lid, I cued a reminder to change all passwords again in 90 days. Not fear, maintenance. The way you service a car you depend on, the way you check the smoke detector even when there's no smell of burning. When I finally stood, the room felt balanced. Not untouched, never untouched, but arranged with intention. I poured a glass of water and drank it to the last drop. Once I would have done that without thinking. Now it felt like claiming a small country inside my chest. I went back to the lake I used to visit as a kid, a wide sheet of water edged by a curved path and low reeds. On Sundays, families rented paddle boats and the air carried the dull brass of a distant marching band. I chose a weekday morning, quiet, cloudy, the shore empty except for an older couple walking a terrier who insisted every goal was a personal affront. I sat on a bench and took a bottle of cranberry juice from my bag. I had bought it the night before, hands steady, heart undecided. For months I'd avoided the color red in glasses, the way some people avoid alleys after dark. The sight of it tightened my stomach. I unscrewed the cap and held the bottle up to the light. The juice glowed like a signal flare. I expected a tremor, a wave of panic. What came instead was something like grief. Not for the drink, obviously. For everything it had come to mean. I'm not afraid of you, I said, and for the first time I believed it. I poured the juice onto the dirt beside the bench, watched the soil swallow it whole, a stain that would fade by afternoon. Then I left the empty bottle in the recycling bin and bought tea from a kiosk. A paper cup that warmed my hands and tasted like clean beginnings. On the walk home, an idea that had been nudging me for weeks finally pushed its way forward. I started drafting notes for a small open-source project. A step-by-step toolkit for personal digital safety. Not corporate policies, not jargon. Just clear human instructions. How to layer authentication, track account activity, store backup codes, create evidence trails without tipping off an abuser. A ladder for anyone standing where I had stood. Back in my apartment, I opened a new repo and typed the first line of the README. No one gets to use your trust as a weapon. I hit save. A first commit. A quiet vow that what hurt me wouldn't end with me. Closure didn't arrive as fireworks. It came as a dinner I cooked for people who had earned seats at my table. Jay brought a salad in a massive wooden bowl. 2 neighbors carried a loaf of bread so fresh the crust crackled when we cut it. We ate on mismatched plates because I had finally stopped waiting to buy the goods set for a future that once depended on their approval. I set a single empty glass at the center like a small monument to everything I'd survived. Not cranberry. Just glass catching light, a reminder that contrast, shadow and brightness, makes shape visible. Conversation rolled through the room. Work gossip, book recommendations, a terrible movie everyone loved to hate. Someone asked how I was the real kind, the kind that waits for the answer. I told them a version that was true and enough, better. Building new things. After everyone left, I stood in the doorway and listened to the echo of laughter thinning into quiet. The apartment smelled like garlic and rosemary. A stack of plates waited by the sink, but there was no hurry. I leaned against the frame and watched the city through my window, blinking lights like steady heartbeats. My phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown number. For a shard of a second the past rushed in. Get up and leave now. But the fear didn't take root. I answered. A recorded voice informed me I'd won a cruise. I laughed, sudden and bright, and blocked the number. Then I turned the phone face down and let the silence settle back around me, not as an accusation but as a home. People talk about forgiveness like a door you need to walk through. Maybe for some it is. For me, forgiveness was not the point. The point was understanding that love without safety is a mirage, that duty without consent is a cage, and that blood is only one way to name a bond. I chose another choice. I blew out the candles, washed the dishes, and stacked them to dry. On my desk, the open-source guide waited for tomorrow's edits, for strangers I'd never meet who might need a map through the dark. I turned off the lights and stood a moment longer in the soft blue of the room. I had left the house. I had not looked back. And for the first time in my life, the future didn't feel like a test I had to pass. It felt like a place I was already allowed to be.